This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Today's discussion is about raising children in a remote world. So one of the great concepts we talk about is trying to instill the right work ethic in our children, the right sort of nature to take care of business, do what they have to do. We call it wanting our kids to be constructive adults and physically and mentally healthy. And one of the great challenges you see in this remote world, this remote work environment, it's for so much of traditionally in the workplace was there were sort of almost these boiler room concepts where people were doing cold calling, but there was a lot of them, and it created sort of an environment in which it was easier, I think, to get on board, start making the calls, start doing those kinds of things, and so forth, than it is in a more remote work environment. And so what happens is we move towards a more remote work environment, and this is different than like what the parents could do from early on to try and have their kids have this work ethic. That's a very challenging question, and some of it's wired, some of it's driven. You know, one of my colleagues had, their parents would essentially make them do chores on the farm that weren't really that needed, just to instill that right work ethic. And God bless that type of drive of the parents, because it takes a lot of work of the parents to have a plan and a goal to instill that work ethic in their children. But I do think in this remote work environment that employers almost have to create more structure than they would otherwise, because so much of that structure came so naturally when people were in an office setting and dealing with other people. And I know that some of the big employers are trying to push people back to an in-office setting for exactly this reason. But that itself is a great challenge because not everybody wants to go back to the office environment, and certainly a ton of people don't. And so it's very hard to get people back to that remote environment. So I think the solution, as I look at this, is work ethic in a remote environment. It's probably for employers more and more structure to pick up that great middle of employees that could be great, but probably need more structure than people would need if they were in the office just every day, side by side with colleagues doing their jobs. Whereas if you're in your own environment, in the coffee shop, in the living room, wherever you might be doing your work, you don't have that social energy, that social competitiveness. It's why so many things in life were built around these people are racing against these people are doing against those people. It creates a social environment where people are working towards things. And I think as we move towards a long-term hybrid or remote work environment, it's going to be incumbent on employers. The top 10, 20% are going to thrive regardless, but it's getting that 60 to 80% in the middle to thrive. It's going to take more structure from employees than maybe we want to provide, because it's work to provide it, because if not, you're going to lose a lot of the productivity of this great middle of employees. I think it's a fascinating thing that we'll be continuing to study for years to come, I am sure. But I love the topic of how do you instill that work ethic in a remote environment, and the follow-on question of how do you instill that work ethic in your children as well. Fascinating subjects that we'll be talking about a lot over the next year. Thank you for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. I think the one answer is probably in a remote work environment, it's almost incumbent upon the employer and the leaders to put in more huddles, more structure, more everything, just to keep everybody, on the same page and aligned and so forth. And not easy. And at the end of the day, my sort of, I salute both those employers trying to make this work and those employees trying to make this work, trying to really have that motivation, that energy, that alignment that came so naturally in an office environment that comes a little bit more challenging in remote environments. In any event, thank you so much for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. And thank you, as always, to Jeremy Core, our magnificent producer. Thank you very much.